We are live here on the Fantasy Fanatics MMA podcast. I'm your host, James Lynch, joined as always by my sidekick, my good friend, one of the best in the business, JHK. JHK, what's up, man? How are you?
Good, man. Perfect. Life is good.
Yes, I've been killing it with the interviews. I saw your interview yesterday with Lance Palmer. I know you've been on the grind and all that. Interviewed Ben Askren yesterday on my end, so you guys got to check that out. I posted it yesterday, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk today about Nate Diaz and Leon Edwards. Going to be doing a full preview of that fight. This is how we do this podcast every week. We pick an upcoming notable fight, and we go through it from a stats perspective. We give our picks, everything else. Want to remind everyone, download the Fantasy Fanatics app. We'll be making our picks on there this weekend. You can go head-to-head with us. We're also going to be using them as a database today to go through everything in this fight between Nate Diaz and Leon Edwards. As we always do, John, let's start first with sort of the implications of this fight and everything else. I'll be completely honest. This came out of complete left field for me. Part of the reason being that, Nate Diaz, if you look at all of his opponents since he fought Conor McGregor, they're either UFC champions or former UFC champions or someone that's at least notable. Like even for Masvidal, he's fought for a title or at the time was like, the biggest star last year. Leon Edwards doesn't really fit that mold. Just first, your surprise level in terms of this fight getting booked.
Remember when Dana was telling everybody that they had something in the works for Nate Diaz and everybody was having all these speculations like, oh, it's going to be this guy and that guy. And I even, when I interviewed Dan Hooker, he was thinking that it was him. Like he was the mystery man. But then Leon Edwards comes out of nowhere, out of left field and gets the fight. I was shocked too. I'm surprised nobody really actually kind of leaked it at least a little bit because, that stuff is kind of hard to keep under wraps, especially with so many eyes and ears in the industry. But yeah, man, I think the UFC played it perfectly and they did it, man. They put a fight together for Nate Diaz. I'm happy for Leon Edwards.
Before we dig into the stats, I want to talk a little bit more about the optics of this fight. So Nate Diaz, hasn't fought since that fight against Jorge Masvidal. It was stopped via doctor stoppage, cut back in November of 2019. So it's been a bit. But saying that, Leon Edwards has only had one fight himself since July of 2019. So both, have had long layoffs sort of heading into the fight. But also, I think, in terms of why this fight makes sense, I think now that I've had a chance to sort of digest it all, it does make sense. And I'll tell you why for a couple of reasons. Number one, if Nate Diaz wins, he's getting a title shot. I don't think there's any argument there. Does he deserve it off merit? Absolutely not. But it's Nate Diaz. I think that's one thing, and I'd be willing to bet that Usman and his manager are kind of like, look, we want big fights. That's why Masvidal is getting this rematch, is because of the fact that it's a bigger fight than some of the other names in the division. Now, if Nate Diaz wins, you bet Nate Diaz is going to be fighting Kamaru Usman next, regardless of what else happens in that division with some of the other marquee matchups. And for Leon Edwards, I actually think it's a win-win for him as well, right? He was supposed to fight Chimaev. There's a lot of hype there with Chimaev, and had he won that fight, I think he would have made a good case for a title shot. But now you're fighting a guy in Diaz who has a layoff, who's got a huge name. This guy's got the win over McGregor that he'll live, keep in his back pocket the rest of his life. I mean, that's basically his meal ticket going forward in his career for Nate Diaz. So, here's a fight for Leon, and we'll get into it. I mean, I don't have to think I'm spoiling anything here. Leon Edwards is definitely the favorite in this fight, and we'll get to the odds in a bit, but obviously it favors him. So kind of what I'm getting at is that Leon Edwards, it's a favorable fight for him. It's fighting a guy that has a lot of clout, and two, like there's not a lot of risk there in the sense that he's fighting a guy that's dangerous, that doesn't have a name. It's a complete opposite. It's a winnable fight for him against a guy who's like I said, still got a lot of clout, so to speak. I know that's the term the kids use these days, but what do you think of that in terms of the optics of it?
I completely understand it. It's a win-win situation for everybody in this, even the UFC. It's always a win-win situation for the UFC, right? Whatever they put a fight together, they know whoever wins this fight is going to benefit them no matter what. So, a lot of people will look at this fight and say, oh, it's a money fight. It's only for the money. But really, if you look at it, both guys are gaining a lot if they win in this fight, man. Either opponent, the title fight's coming up, like you said, Masvidal versus Usman. Usman wins, he gets another big fight if Nate Diaz wins. If Leon Edwards wins, he gets a bona fide title contender, right? Like it's no secret. And if Masvidal wins and Nate Diaz wins, that's a huge fight for the UFC for both guys. Big paydays. I love it. When I first started, I was like, and then now I think about it and I hear people's opinions. I'm just like, I'm starting to warm up to it a lot more, and I'm hyped for it.
Yeah, I am as well. Just to see how it unfolds. It's a very interesting matchup. And let's dig into the style matchup here. Let's start first with Nate Diaz first. As you guys know, Nate Diaz, 35 years old. I forget that he's that much older than Leon, right? Like he's 35. Leon's only 29. So a little bit older there in terms of the age. He's 6 feet tall with a 76-inch reach. So Nate Diaz is going to be, a little bit undersized in terms of fighting Leon Edwards, in terms of the height anyways. The reach advantage actually goes to Nate as well. Nate has a 76-inch reach, or compared to Leon Edwards, who's only got a 74-inch reach. So it'll be interesting. So, I mean, let's be honest here. Diaz is a welterweight. I mean, he's fought at lightweight, but he was big for the lightweight division. So him fighting at welterweight, it's not going to be a case of where Leon's going to be like towering over him or anything like that. So want to get that out of the way first. He's got a 20-12 record. This is a guy that, in some ways is very dangerous because he's got nothing to lose. I mean, yes, he could, if he doesn't, let's put it this way. If Nate Diaz doesn't win this fight, he's still going to get good fights going forward. He's Nate Diaz, right? Like Leon Edwards, if he loses this opportunity, where does he go from here? Like, it's going to be much harder for him to get back in the spot he's in, whereas Nate Diaz is going to get money fights from here on out. So like I mentioned, he hasn't fought since the Masvidal fight back in November of 2019. Prior to that, he beat Anthony Pettis after a lengthy layoff, won that by decision. That was a pretty good win back then. If I remember correctly, Anthony Pettis was actually the betting favorite in the fight, so Diaz going out there and surprising in that one. And then, of course, he lost that majority decision before that to Conor McGregor back in August of 2016 in a fight that honestly could have gone either way. Like, it was a very close fight. I think Conor got kind of lucky to some degree of edging up that decision, but nonetheless, things certainly took a very strange turn, ever since Nate Diaz won. Because here's the thing, John, and I don't mind mentioning this, is that let's say Nate Diaz never got that Conor McGregor fight at UFC 196. I think there's probably a good chance that Nate Diaz maybe wins one, maybe loses a couple, but he probably ends up in like a Bellator, don't you think? Because like, it's not as though like this was just totally unexpected with the circumstances of Rafael dos Anjos being out of the title fight, McGregor having to fight Diaz beating McGregor, which people didn't think was going to happen. McGregor was seemingly unbeatable at that point, at least in the UFC anyways. So Nate Diaz, regardless of what happens in this fight, he's in a good spot because he's Nate Diaz. So one of the other things I wanted to mention with Nate Diaz is that if you look in his career, he's very tough to finish. The last stoppage loss, I mean, obviously the doctor stoppage, yes, that's considered a TKO, that's a stoppage loss. But the actual, like the only fight that he's had where he's actually been like finished, again, was a bit kind of like the doctor stoppage where he fought Josh Thompson. I think Thompson would have finished him anyways, but if you remember, they actually threw in the towel in that fight. And that wasn't Nate, that was his team who threw in the towel. But you could see Thompson was absolutely dominating Nate Diaz in that fight. But that fight, John, was way back in 2013. So it's like, you think of all the people that Nate Diaz has fought in his career, Rafael dos Anjos, McGregor a couple times, Cerrone, Rory McDonald. These are fights that he ended up losing decisions against as opposed to, getting finished. So I think one of the things that we need to keep an eye on in this fight, while a lot of people are picking Edwards here, is the durability of Nate Diaz. If Leon Edwards can't go out there and finish it early, the fight could get interesting if it goes into later rounds. Although saying that, Leon Edwards has a lot of main event experience. So your thoughts on Diaz in this fight and what he brings to the table?
If you look at Diaz, he's only fought 10 times since 2012. What does that tell you? That's not being very active. And Leon, his last 10 fights, his streak started in 2015, right? And I feel like the level of competition, you kind of have to push that to the side, right? You got to have to look at these guys as new fighters because they're both heading in with, I think they're different. I think Nate Diaz is different. I think Nate Diaz has spent the last couple of years putting on size. If you've noticed, he is a lot bigger than he was, like, I guess, entering that first Conor McGregor fight. If you see a lot of pictures of over the years, he's just big, he's just wider, you know what I mean? And I think that's going to play a huge factor in this fight against Leon Edwards, the size difference. Even though he's shorter, he has a longer reach, like you mentioned earlier. I think that's going to be effective for a boxer like him. And Leon likes to box too. With Nate, man, it's just, that's the only things I see that is working out for him, though. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really see much against Leon. Leon is on a roll. Like, he has massive momentum. And I know we're going to get into Leon, but man, I see so many disadvantages for Nate Diaz right now. I don't know. It's hard to mention anything that's going to win him this fight, except for, like you said, the cardio. That could be a question mark. But we've seen Leon go 5 rounds before, but Nate has much more experience. And the thing about Nate too is his face. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people are going to point this out. Like, he gets cut easy, and Leon has a great jab, right? And if he sticks that jab out a few good times and cuts Nate, we don't know what's going to happen. This fight could be also ending in a doctor stoppage too. It's just Nate, man, he's in a push. I think he's in a position where he's kind of do or die. You know what I mean? I know a lot of people talking about the Conor fight, but I don't know if that's going to always be there. How many years has passed?
Well, okay, but hold on. I'll interrupt you for a second there. What if, if Conor's got this trilogy fight with Dustin, there's a good chance, I think, that he loses that. Where does Conor go from there? if Nate Diaz loses this fight, where does he go? You got the trilogy fight. You've always got that in your back pocket, right? Like that's the one thing I agree with you in the sense that it's do or die if Nate ever wants a chance at fighting for a title again. I mean, this is it. This is it. He's 35. I mean, this isn't Jan Blachowicz. This is a situation in a division that's very deep where if Nate Diaz doesn't win this fight, he's going to be way behind the 8 ball if he doesn't win this. So I agree with it there, but he's always got the McGregor fight. He's also got the Masvidal fight again. You know, there's Diaz fans out there, and look, I love the passion. It is very annoying to hear from a lot of Diaz fans, but like, let's call it what it is. I was at that fight in New York. He wasn't coming back to beat Masvidal. Come on, let's go back and watch that fight. And you sitting there telling me that Diaz was going to make a late comeback. Come on. How many times has Masvidal been finished in his career? That wasn't happening. Masvidal was on his way to winning a decision, most likely, or a late stoppage, which ended up being a stoppage anyways. But Masvidal was taking over that fight. I mean, I just remember sitting there being like, wow, like, because I thought after Diaz had fought Pettis, it would be a little bit more competitive. But no, Masvidal had his number from that opening bell, and it wasn't even close. So I don't know what fight people were watching, but that was my view of it anyways. But sorry, I interrupted you.
Would you consider Masvidal a better striker than Leon, or just a different striker?
It's different. I think is better. Leon's got decent striking. Here's the thing though, and actually we might as well get into Leon right now. We might as well pull up all the stats and everything that he's got. Here's a fact that a lot of people don't know about Leon Edwards. Did you know Leon Edwards has the second fastest knockout in welterweight history?
Oh, I've seen the highlight many times. I just don't know against who.
8 seconds. The person who has the record is Jorge Masvidal, which is crazy to think. Like everyone talks about how boring Leon is. People forget that, and mind you, that was his second UFC fight. So a lot of things to talk about with Leon Edwards here. We mentioned it there. He's younger. He's 29 years old. He's 6'2", so a bit of a reach or a height advantage in this one. Doesn't have the reach advantage that goes to Nate Diaz. Coming off the controversial fight with Bilal Muhammad, but I mean, I'll call it like it is. And I'm a big Bilal Muhammad fan. I think he's great. I love his Twitter and his show and everything. Leon was going to win that fight. I mean, I don't think yes, it's unfortunate the way the fight ended, but I mean, I don't think people were feeling like Bilal was going to turn the tide. Maybe if the fight went on, but I felt pretty good about Leon Edwards early on in that fight. Now, before that, he got the win over Dos Anjos, got the win over Gunnar Nelson. I know those wins don't look as good as they did back then, but still, those are wins. He also beat Cerrone. I mean, you don't just go on a 9-fight unbeaten streak for nothing. You know, it's very hard to do that in MMA, regardless of who you're fighting. Let's also mention the fact this is a guy who's got a win over Vicente Luque, which how good does that win look now with how many losses Luque's had in the UFC? Barely any. So his last loss was to Usman, and that was back in 2015. And I think you're seeing the improvements of Leon Edwards since then. The other thing I'll mention is his debut against Claudio Silva was a close fight. I mean, it was a split. It could have gone either way. I don't know exactly the circumstances as far as that fight, but I'm sure if they fought again, Leon would win that fight. So, I mean, we're realistically looking at a guy who's only really lost the champ and had a no contest and then had a really close fight in his debut. So, yeah, Leon's look great. The other thing we should point out with Leon Edwards now is that, you know, it seems like the restrictions in the UK have been lifted a little bit better. So he's actually getting some proper training from some of the teammates I've talked to. And Leon himself has mentioned he's had a much better situation. A lot of people talking about Leon Edwards turning down fights or being scared. We're in a pandemic, people. Like, he couldn't get to the States to fight Woodley. He couldn't train properly to fight Usman. He couldn't even fly over to Abu Dhabi to fight Usman back when that title fight was on the table in July here. So Edwards is ready to go. And I think, if anything, he's gotten better because he's actually been having time to work on his craft, heal up those injuries. But Leon Edwards, you see it. I mean, this guy, you know, for the most part, does go the distance. His last, at least when he fights, you know, sort of notable competition. We did see that stoppage win over Peter Sabata, which was a TKO win. Got a submission win over Albert Tumanov. Remember how big Tumanov was back then? That was a big win. Like I mentioned, the 8-second win over Seth Baczynski. So I don't think if Leon wins this fight, it's going to be by stoppage. I mean, if it is, it might be later. By the way, we didn't even mention this. This is kind of crazy. This is the first 5-round co-main event in UFC history. I'm sure money had to play a role in that as far as it being that way. But yeah, I don't know who that favors per se, because Diaz has great cardio. Leon Edwards has obviously been in main events as well, so it should be interesting. But yeah, the other thing I look at is just the fact that I think Edwards is just a very well-rounded fighter. Like, he's not amazing in anything. Like, you don't, when you talk about Leon Edwards, you don't say, oh, Leon Edwards has knockout, you know, is a knockout artist. Not really. I mean, you don't think of it that way. Leon Edwards is a great ground specialist. He's got some submission wins, but I wouldn't, you know, I'd put like a Damian Maia ahead of him, for example. Leon is just a good, solid fighter, but he's not exceptional in any area. But that's the way he's been winning his fights is just by being well-rounded. He's been put in different situations. He's been able to adapt here. So there's that. The one key thing in this fight as well that I want to point out, Leon Edwards has never been submitted. He's never been finished, other than he had an illegal knee. That was a DQ, I think, back when he ended up losing that fight. It was a illegal knee situation. But in general, Leon Edwards has not been finished. So if Diaz cannot finish Leon Edwards, it's going to be very interesting. But conversely, like we mentioned with Nate Diaz, he's pretty durable himself. So there's a lot of things that go into this in the fight. But Leon Edwards, I would say, has a lot of the advantages in this fight. And that's why you're seeing him as such a sizable favorite right now on the betting odds.
Going off of what you talk about durability, right, with Nate, and is he that durable? Do you think he's continually durable? Because he's been in a lot of like damaging fights for himself. You know what I mean? He's taken a lot of punishment. He's kind of had that style of like he'll get hit to hit you. Yeah. And he's done it in one fights, right? And I don't think that's going to be effective against Leon. One thing I looked at Leon's record, he has wins over some great fighters, right? But two wins that that stick out is RDA and Cerrone. Both of those guys are lightweights that moved up to welterweight. And what is Nate Diaz? A lightweight that moved up to welterweight, right?
Yeah.
And also when you look at Nate's record, the guys that he beat at welterweight are mostly lightweights that went up to welterweight, right? Sure. Not true welterweights. And I think that that's important to point out too, that these guys, when they face certain types of opposition, they do really well. And it could be possible in this fight, it's going to work out that way for Leon too. Leon, man, like you said, like you pointed out, that he is good everywhere. He's just not exceptional. And I think the best aspect of his game would be his striking, right? Mm-hmm. How he uses his boxing and mixes in the kicks, right? That's one thing that Nate Diaz doesn't use. He doesn't use kicks. Leon does use kicks. You know, in his last fight against Bilal, he was using the kicks very effectively. He was dominating that fight. And I thought, like you said, he was going to go on to win that fight. He was probably going to end up finishing him in like the third or fourth round, something like that, right? Even if he didn't, he would have went to the decision. It would have been pretty dominant. And I think, him coming back, this fight is like a little bit over 2 months, turnaround. I think it's perfect for Leon, man. I think he's going to ride that wave, and he's going to go in there with a lot of confidence against a guy that he probably thinks mentally himself that Nate Diaz is washed up. I think that's what Leon thinks too in his mind. This is just speculation, but I think he thinks that about Diaz. Don't you think?
I definitely do. And one thing I will touch on is that, we've talked about the durability of Nate Diaz, but like you mentioned, he's been in a lot of wars. How many wars has Leon Edwards been in? I can't think of one. And that does play a role, John, because, when the fight goes on and, you see certain fighters, especially as they get older, like Diaz is 35. Like, I mean, in fight years, that's, you're starting to sort of teeter off a little bit, unless you're in heavyweight. I mean, that seems like if you're 35 at heavyweight, it's almost like you're a 20-year-old basically in that division. But at welterweight, I mean, it does seem like we've seen the Tyron Woodleys and certain other fights. Stephen Thompson's the only exception to the rule. That guy seems to get better as his age goes on. But in general, in the welterweight division, you've got a guy, Nate Diaz, who's 35. It's tough. So, I mean, honestly, I can't answer that, but I will say that, obviously he has taken a lot of damage, but saying that, he's been hit pretty hard by Conor McGregor and didn't go down, right? I mean, I think Conor dropped him in the second fight, but twice. In general, he was never finished by Conor, which you would think with the amount of people that Conor's finished that would have happened. But saying that, Leon Edwards hasn't taken a Conor McGregor punch, right? So I think the fact that Leon has not been in those wars will benefit him in this fight as well. I know we're going to get to questions a little bit later here in the chat, but I know someone had mentioned, what's Diaz's path to victory? Well, I think the only path to victory would be if somehow Leon Edwards gasses and Diaz, really puts on the striking like he did against Pettis. Because the thing with Pettis was he really got in his face. Pettis couldn't get, he couldn't be aggressive Pettis, right? Because Diaz had him on the fence the whole fight. He was just, coming forward, going after him. Pettis didn't have an answer. That's what Nate Diaz needs to do from the opening gate. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Leon's going to be the aggressor, and he's going to go in there and really, really put it on him there. So we're almost coming up to the 20-minute mark. We usually do 20, 25 minutes of a breakdown here. I got to get your pick. I would be shocked if you're going to pick Diaz, but let's hear it anyways.
If I were to pick Diaz and if I think the path to victory for Diaz would be to somehow, like you said, the Pettis fight, get him in the clinch, tire him out, elbows, punches, make it dirty, or maybe go to the ground, submit him off his back. I think Diaz has the capability of doing that, but I don't see none of that stuff happening. I see Leon going out there using the jab effectively, combinations, beating up the leg. Diaz doesn't check leg kicks, right? And I think Edwards is going to go out there and kill that leg. I think that's going to be a huge part of that game plan. And I could see him breaking him down throughout 5 rounds. I don't know. It's hard to say he's going to finish Diaz because who finishes Diaz? Like you said, Thompson finished him, and then he was stopped by a doctor in his last fight. But if he does finish Diaz, I think he finishes him in the last round or the fourth in the championship rounds, right? I think that's when he could get it done. I look at the Conor McGregor fights, right? I think that took a lot out of Nate Diaz, right? He took a lot of damage in both fights, and I think Leon will knock him down a few times before he actually finishes him. I think it's going to be pretty dominant.
Something we didn't even talk about, and this will lead to my pick choice as well, but Nate Diaz can't stop a takedown. I mean, how many? Do you remember that? I know it's a couple of years ago. Do you remember the Rafael dos Anjos fight? Like, he kept getting taken down. And this has always been my biggest criticism with the Diaz brothers is, and I used to be a huge Diaz brother fan back in the day. Like, I remember Nick's fight against Robbie Lawler back in the day. One of my favorite fights of all time. The commentary was biased towards Lawler. Nick Diaz knocks out Robbie Lawler. Just an incredible fight. But the thing that always annoyed me as they continued in their career was, we're not leaving. We're staying at our gym. We're loyal. All this, you gym jumpers. I remember they used to give Tyson Griffin shit for leaving the gym and going elsewhere to train at like Extreme Couture. Well, guess what? That's what you have to do to get better as a martial artist. And I honestly feel like both Diaz brothers have been pretty much the same over the last 5-10 years. They can strike well. They've got good cardio. That's it though. Leg kicks, non-existent. Takedown defense, non-existent. Like all these things. And I think the reason that Nate had success against Conor is because Conor's going to strike with him, but Conor's got a bad ground game. We've always known that Conor's had issues on the ground. Maybe not a bad ground game, but you've seen a lot of his losses are by submission. So I always get into arguments with McGregor fans about, but the truth is there. He's lost a lot by submission. But you get what I'm saying? Like, I think Leon Edwards, even if things aren't going well in the striking department, which I think that's 50-50, Leon can always take him down. And even though Diaz has got a great ground game, I think Leon is just too active, from top position. I don't think Diaz is going to go out there and submit to Leon Edwards. And like we mentioned, Leon Edwards has never been finished. He's fought really good guys. Like, I just don't see Nate Diaz going out there and stopping him. And can we also stop this narrative of Nate Diaz is going to knock out Leon Edwards? Like, it seems like every fight, Diaz fans are like, Nate Diaz is going to knock someone out. I'll tell you the last knockout win Nate Diaz had. It was the Gray Maynard fight. And that was in 2013. And that was a point where Gray Maynard was getting knocked out by everyone. So this idea that Nate Diaz is going to get like a first round, he's not a power puncher, just like his brother. They wear you down and they win like a late, like TKO type finish. That's how they win fights, or they win a decision. But I don't see that happening here against Leon. Leon's pretty durable. Like I said, hasn't taken hardly any damage in the fight. So who's my pick? I'm taking Leon. But I would look at that decision prop because I think you might get some value there. I think it is likely it could go, the full 5 rounds, even though, like I said, it is a 5-round fight. One thing we didn't mention here, I believe Diaz did get surgery to clean up some of that scar tissue. So I don't know if he'll be cut open as easily as he was in the Masvidal fight, but I'm not a doctor. You aren't either. So we're going to have to take a guess on that one. But I would say in general, it's probably not going to get stopped by doctor stoppage. But I'm picking Leon Edwards. I'd be shocked if Nate Diaz won this fight, John. I'll be completely blunt. I think Diaz is, it's good for Leon. It's good to see this fight. It's totally out of left field, but I just don't see how Nate wins this one. He's not going to knock him out. He might win a decision, but I don't know. Anthony Pettis is not the same as Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards is a much better fighter there.
Yeah, the odds are stacked against Diaz, but props to him, man, for taking this fight, because I don't think he had to take this fight. I think that he could have took another fight. He could have waited for, Conor to take the trilogy and then pick up the leftovers, so to say, right after he got beat the second time by Dustin, if that actually happens. But yeah, I think the UFC offered something that he could not refuse, especially like we talked about earlier, the title shot if he beats Leon, and then that's a major payday on top of this payday, because of course he already gets paid. I don't even know how much he probably gets paid better than 95% of the roster, right? So
of course, yeah.
Even
He's Nate Diaz.
He's
Nate Diaz. Yeah. Here's a little conspiracy theory I'll throw it your way, and I don't mind mentioning this. I have a theory that Nate Diaz, part of the reason he took the Edwards fight is because he's trying to get out of his contract. He's trying to get those fights off there, fights off the books, because I'm telling you, he's looking at these guys, and I know for a fact that he's actually been in touch with Canelo Alvarez. I know there's some talk of him potentially training with Canelo at some point. He's looking at boxing and going, look, I'm getting just as much viewership of these guys. I'm just as popular as some of these boxers, and I'm getting half the paycheck. I mean, a lot more than most UFC fighters, but still. But I have this theory as well that they're kind of looking at what's going on, and they're going to run out the contract. So that might be another reason to pick Leon here, because Nate just wants to get his fights out of the way, go out and box some YouTube guy, and you make $1 million. Like, look at Ben Askren. This guy's going to make $10 million to fight a YouTube star. I'm sure Nate Diaz is looking at that and looking like, I'm an actual striker, and I could probably find some success as well. And I'm an even bigger name. Well, maybe not bigger than, they're probably on par as far as fan bases and stuff, but both are pretty big draws. But you get what I'm saying here. I think Nate Diaz wants to run out that UFC contract, go do Diaz promotions or whatever, and do like a boxing fight. I seriously think that's the case. And at 35, his time's running out. So I think that's why he took Edwards as opposed to anyone else. It's another theory I have on top of that. So
yeah, it kind of reminds me of Mark Hunt. Remember when he was suing the UFC and he was still under contract and he was just taking fights just to get out of his contract, and it didn't work out really too well for Mark Hunt at the end of that. run.
All right, let's get to some questions. My man Mike in the back. We'll go to Bob and Bear TV. I wonder what that show's about. Bob's and Bear.